Hi, here's another Valentine's Day card using a Big Shot today with some burlap. And my thought here is rough materials work well on masculine cards. So a lot of times we are making a Valentine's Day card together, but we're all women. We're probably going to give it to someone who could possibly be more masculine. So using texture can make a card that would normally you might make a little bit frilly looking look a lot more masculine. So I'm going to use burlap today. The reason is because I've noticed it in the craft stores and the scrapbooking stores a lot. So I've been trying to see what I can do with it. I made a journal cover with it, but I think it's great for this card. You'll see how it turns out as like a background for the focal piece. So I'm going to combine some textures here. So since I'm using burlap, I'm going to also use some early espresso cardstock, and I'm going to prep this cardstock to have a wood grain background. And you'll see that the idea of the raw wood that comes through in this card a lot, and the nature comes from the fact that I'm going to use a tree stamp. So I've cut this card kind of different today. I've cut it at 12 by 3, and I'm scoring it at 6. So my card will be tall, but it will also be long. When you use these longer cards, you'll have to get the longer envelopes. Now, I'll put a tag up as to the number for ordering envelopes for this size card. Again, it's 12 by 12 by 3, scored at 6 inches. And I'm using the wood grain background stamp, which I'm inking up with Versamark. And I'm going to use it as a way to add a gentle texture to this card. I'm focusing on those knots in the wood, so I'm trying to get as many knots as possible on the whole front face of this card. So when you use this size card, you need a 6-inch by 3-inch face. So once I've got that stamped down with Versamark, I'm now going to do some more embossing, and this time with clear embossing powder, because this is a more discreet emboss. Its whole purpose is just to add texture. So as opposed to, say, running a folder through the Big Shot, I'm using powder to create texture. It works great, especially if you have no wood folders for your Big Shot. So I'm going to heat this, and notice that, as I'm heating this in the normal way, I'm going to be flipping this card around a few times, and that's just to help control the warping, because the paper does warp. But if you flip the paper around while you're heating embossing, kind of use your hand to shape the card, you'll be surprised how you can remove the warping right out of the card. You balance it out. The only thing that I didn't like the way this turned out is that it has a little tiny edge of it that didn't get the wood grain stamp. And so I used the cutter to cut that little piece off. I wanted the whole front face of this to have that wood grain embossing. So sometimes I don't hesitate to cut off, although you could stamp twice with the wood grain stamp and get that little bottom piece. Again, I would have a hard time lining it up. Okay, so I'm going to take this burlap that I cut out a circle simply with my Big Shot, and I'm going to use it as a background of this tree stamp. So first I'm going to stamp the tree stamp on Whisper White paper. I'm going to also dress up this tree stamp so that it looks textured as well. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use markers to add multiple colors to the tree stamp. So I'm going to use cherry cobbler. I'm going to use early espresso for the trunk. And then I'm going to add a little bit of soft suede here and there on the tree too, just to add a variety, because trees aren't one color. And I'm going to use the markers to do this so that I can easily provide multiple layers of color. So markers are a great option when you don't want to stamp with just one color. They're a great option to give you some real texture in your stamping as well. Again, I think that with masculine cards, the more texture, the better. You could even, masculine cards are really friendly for metal, foil, all kinds of elements that they tend to appreciate. So I'm just kind of dabbing this soft suede in there, just again for variety, and then I'm going to use the early espresso on the trunk. I find that marker work is so relaxing, so I can do it for hours, you know. I can just make a whole bunch of focal pieces and then make my card later. This is Smooch, and notice that I'm not shaking that bottle, I'm twirling it. When you twirl it, you avoid getting air bubbles in it, and so I'm just giving it a gentle spritz, and then I'm going to push that down into the paper. Now I'm careful not to rock this, but I'm also holding it down for a second, just because there's mist involved, and that'll help it soak into the paper. And this gives a lovely shimmer when you use the Smooch. You can't see it in the video, but it sparkles. I decided that before I punch this out, I'm going to heat it a little bit. So the heat set avoids me dragging the ink with the punch. And so that's why I heat it first. And then I'm using a 2.5-inch punch to punch the tree out. And I'm kind of leaving the tree over to the edge. I'm not centering it in the punch because I want to leave room for the little sentiment to fit. Okay, and then again, I'm using the Amour par définition stamp set, which in English is, I think, Valentine's defined. Doesn't mean the same thing. And on there is this little stamp that means kiss in French. So I'm going to put that little kiss stamp on there. In the English version of this set, I think it says love, and then the O in love is a heart. So again, I'm combining two colors. I think Cherry Cobbler for the kiss, or the French bisou, and the early espresso for the brackets around bisou. And then I'm just stamping that down, being very careful not to rock, pushing straight down and then picking straight up. And there's my focal point. I wish you could see how it sparkles because of the Smooch. Try out Smooch. I think you'll love it. It's a great replacement for water misting to add another layer of texture and sparkle. I'm also going to smooch the burlap. So I twirl a little bit and then I spray. I took it away from the camera to spray, but I sprayed that. And in order to stick things to cloth and to metal, my best friend is the glue gun. So you'll find that that's the best way to attach things. So I put a whole bunch of glue between those two pieces. And then I put some of the glue, this is all hot glue, on the back. And that's how I attach it to the card. So glue gun was also helpful, not only because I had cloth here, but I also was sticking cloth to texture. And texture adds an extra layer. It needs a really strong adhesive. Because this card is so rounded, do you see how rounded it is? I wanted to round the corners, you know, because of all the roundness and the tree and the focal point. But before I round the corners, I'm just using my blender pens just to ground that tree. So you'll see that I just put a little bit of gray under the tree and blended it in so it looked like a little piece of ground. I had the feeling of it floating. And then I'm going to add a piece of twine here. So I guess I'm saving my corner rounding for last, even though it's in the back of my head that I don't like it's too square on the bottom. And, you know, I found this little wooden button, and I really love this little wooden button, but it was such a light color wood. I wanted to darken it up so that it would be closer to the face of the card. So I just used an early espresso marker, and what I'm doing with the marker is I'm staining the button. So I rub a little of the ink in, and then I take a cloth and wipe it, and voila, I've got stained wood. So kind of fun. If I had time, I had noticed the video was running out of time here. I would have brought the string through the button, but I was running out of time. So I just attached the button with the glue gun down to the twine in the card. And here I am finally rounding those corners that were bothering me all the way around. Stamping Up suggests you don't go through 2 layers of cardstock at a time with that punch. So do 1/4 corner at a time. I'm adding a center white paper. Again, you could write inside with a white gel pen, but I think the white paper kind of adds some more rawness, and I had kind of distressed the edges of that paper. And now I want to bring the inside of the card into the idea of the outside of the card. So I'm using the same stamp, and I'm only coloring one side of it, because this time when I stamp it down, I'm going to stamp it down only halfway, so that it doesn't take up the white space that's there. I want to use that white space for writing to bring it all together, the tree.